So whenever I get asked, how do I read so much? How do I consume so many stories in the space of a month or a year? One of the pieces of advice or tips that I always suggest, that is one of the ways I get through so many books, is audiobooks. I have been an avid listener of audiobooks ever since I started reading physical books, since I was a toddler and loved being read to by these wonderful voice actors of children's stories, and I've continued that love into my adult years with adult literature. And for me, the benefits of audiobooks in consuming stories is twofold. One is that audiobooks are equally as wonderful as physical books. They are a unique way that brings a piece of literature to life and can really help you fall in love and get into that piece of literature. They also provide a way to read stories and pieces of literature when you can't necessarily read a physical book. And that's why they help me read more. I listen to audiobooks at multiple different times of the day and the week, and when I'm doing various different things. For me, that means that I usually listen to more than one audiobook a month, which can be a little bit difficult given how expensive audiobooks can be individually, and that lots of subscription services allow you to sign up for a specific number of audiobooks. So when BookBeat, which are an audiobook app for your phone, got in contact with me and asked to work with me on a sponsored video, I absolutely jumped at the chance for various reasons, but one of those being that BookBeat allows you to listen to as many audiobooks as you want in a month. So their app gives you access to thousands of audiobooks from a wide variety of different types of literature that you can listen to as many and as frequently as you like during that month. You pay an upfront fee every month of £12.90, which gives you unlimited access to their entire catalogue of books for that month. And they have an incredible selection. I have been listening to quite a few on their app myself since I downloaded it, and I've also noted a few of my favourite audiobooks are on there as well. So in this video I thought I would talk to you a little bit about when I listen to audiobooks, how I fit them in, how that gives me the opportunity to consume more stories, and also recommend you some of my favourite audiobooks that are available on the BookBeat app. So first up, where do I listen to audiobooks? How is it that audiobooks provide me the opportunity to consume so many more stories than I might otherwise? First up is walking. I'm a walker. I love to walk. I was raised in a household where we didn't drive. I don't know how to drive, and the walking was encouraged. And I always listen to audiobooks when I walk. When I walk to work, if I'm walking to university, or if I'm just walking to meet a friend, or even walking around the shops, browsing the bookstore or the clothes shops, whatever I'm doing that day, the supermarket, times when you're just doing everyday chores, everyday bits of life, out and about in the real world. I love to listen to audiobooks. It just feels so wonderful that I can consume stories when I'm doing those necessary tasks. Speaking of necessary tasks, I listen to audiobooks when I clean. If I'm cleaning my bedroom or my bathroom or my kitchen or my house, I listen to an audiobook. I equally listen to audiobooks when I'm cooking. I have such a strong association between various audiobooks and certain meals and cakes, because I perhaps started using that recipe and listening to that story at the same time, which is really wonderful. I know when I was a child as well, I used to listen to audiobooks when I played computer games. I don't so much play computer games anymore, but if you sat me down in front of a game version of Harry Potter or The Sims, instantly what I would hear in my mind would be Jacqueline Wilson's The Girls series, because I used to love listening to the audio cassettes of those books when I was playing my computer games. I also listen to audiobooks if I'm working out, whether that be working out in my house doing, you know, like a workout routine, or if I'm at the gym. So I have always listened to audiobooks at the gym. For me, audiobooks work in a different way from music, in that when I'm listening to music, when I'm working out, I'm very aware that the end of the song is coming up, that a song perhaps only lasts for 3 or 4 minutes and it's this finite amount of time, and it keeps me very aware of the time, which is not necessarily what you want when you're working out. You want to really fully immerse yourself in the workout and not be thinking about when will this be over. You know, enjoy it, make the most of it. And audiobooks actually help me with that because they're just this continuous story. And in fact, there have been occasions where I've continued to work out longer than necessary because I have been so into my story and I just want to keep listening. So I'll just keep exercising, which is really wonderful because working out is incredible for things like your mental health. So I've always loved listening to audiobooks when I'm working out. One thing I will say though is to be careful, because when I was around 17, 18, 19 and was going to the gym, I was also listening a lot to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series on audiobook, and I would find myself, say, on the cross trainer and laughing out loud, and probably people in the gym were looking at me thinking, what is going on with her right now? I also like to listen to audiobooks when I am commuting or travelling. Certain types of public transport make me feel a little bit queasy, like long bus journeys. I get a little bit travel sick, so listening to audiobooks is much better for me, as reading a physical book can make that a little bit worse, whereas an audiobook will not. It also means if, say, I'm standing on the London Underground, it's sometimes a little bit more difficult to read a book, to squeeze in between people like sardines reading a physical book. Although people manage it, I prefer an audiobook in those circumstances. I also like to listen to audiobooks at bedtime. Not always, but if I am feeling really restless, unable to sleep, perhaps stressful or upsetting things are happening in my everyday life, listening to an old favourite on audiobook really helps me to nod off. Quite often that could be Harry Potter, it might just be another childhood favourite, or just a long epic fantasy series that I have fond memories of. I find those are the most immersive audiobooks to take you out of this world when you're feeling quite upset or unable to sleep, and those help me, you know, focus on the story, take my mind off the stresses of the day, and find sleep a little bit easier. And importantly, given all of the times that I evidently like to listen to my audiobooks, which are often out of the house when I'm out and about, you are able on BookBeat to listen to audiobooks when you do not have access to internet. You can either stream them or download them onto your phones, so you can listen to them whenever, wherever. But on that topic, what audiobooks would I recommend? What are my favourites that are available on the BookBeat app that I would recommend you listen to? First up is the Rainwild Chronicles by Robin Hobb. BookBeat have a massive selection of Robin Hobb audiobooks, a few which I have on my to listen to list, as there are still numerous Robin Hobb books that I haven't read. But her Rainwild Chronicles, which is her series focused around dragons, is one of my all-time favourite fantasy series and really one of my favourite book series of all time. Now, back when I actually read these books, I read the first two in physical copy and then listened to the second two on audiobook whilst flipping between the physical and the audiobook, because I was so immersed in this story that I wanted to be able to experience it no matter where I was. And it meant if I was reading the physical one in my bed in the evening, I could then keep listening to the story whilst I was walking to work the next day, and I loved that experience and loved the audiobooks as much as I loved the physical books for Robin Hobb's Rainwild Chronicles. These books, like I mentioned, are focused around dragons. They are set in the fantasy world that Robin Hobb created and has set other series in, and in this instance we follow the new generation of dragons that has just hatched. There hasn't been a mass hatching of dragons in a very long time, and the species is all but extinct. So everyone's very excited for this new hatching. But when the dragons are born, they are runty, underdeveloped, not like the dragons of lore that everyone remembers. And the people essentially want rid of them. So they pick a group of dragon keepers to travel with these dragons to find a new home so that they don't have to deal with them anymore, essentially. And it's about the journey of these dragons and their dragon keepers, and it has an amazing cast of characters, so much wonderful fantasy world building, and I would just highly recommend it to anyone that's interested in fantasy. On the topic of fantasy audiobooks, one audiobook series that I would really recommend checking out is A Song of Ice and Fire. If you, like me, put off reading George R.R. Martin's infamous series for a long time and found it intimidating due to its length, I would really recommend the audiobooks. I read the first book of Game of Thrones in physical book, on my Kindle in fact, but then went on to listen to the next three on audiobook. The first one took me about a year to read. The next 3, nothing like that amount of time, because I'm much more absorbed in the world than I am necessarily reading it in the physical book. So I really recommend listening to Song of Ice and Fire on audiobook. They are excellently narrated, the characters are really well brought to life. I'm sure a lot of you love the TV show, so if you've been meaning to check out the stories in their original form, I would recommend listening to them. They also have quite a few classics on there, including pieces of classical literature, and one piece of classical literature that I always recommend to people if they're trying to get into ancient literature and ancient philosophy as a good place to start is Plato's Symposium. Plato's Symposium is, as I mentioned, a piece of ancient philosophical work which surrounds a group of friends at a symposium discussing what is love and defining it in their own terms, the god and the feeling, and exploring that. And one of the nice things about listening to this on audiobook is because it is a conversation amongst people, each of the different characters in this dialogue has a different voice actor, so it really feels like you're listening to a conversation, and it's almost an easier way to experience something that might be a little bit intimidating if you haven't read a piece of classical literature before. It's just a really nice way to feel like you're listening to people explain these concepts to you and have these conversations, and I think the audiobook for Plato's Symposium is really, really great. But for something a little bit less intense, perhaps try listening to one of my favourite children's audiobooks, and that is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I first experienced this story by listening to it on BookBeat, and I absolutely loved it. It is narrated by Neil Gaiman himself. It also includes some really little creepy sing-song moments which add to the overall eeriness of the story. It is a children's book. It follows a little girl, Coraline, who's looking for something to occupy herself one day and goes through a small door in the unoccupied flat near her own, which takes her into a strange other world where her other mother and other father live. Everything seems identical to her own home, and even her parents are there looking exactly the same minus one detail: they have buttons for eyes. And although of course everything seems nice and cozy and friendly at first, nothing is as it seems. Another favourite fantasy children's book that I listened to on audiobook originally was The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. There's something so nostalgic about this audiobook for me, and I just absolutely love it. It's a wonderful story. I'm sure you're all familiar with The Hobbit, which follows Bilbo Baggins as he sets off on his first ever adventure with a band of dwarves and the wizard Gandalf to reclaim the dwarves' home from the dragon Smaug. A really wonderful fantasy story that takes place before the events of The Lord of the Rings, and one of the nice things about listening to it on audiobook is that it is riddled with songs, the original story, and for those kind of things I like when they're read out loud. I just feel like that's the way they were meant to be experienced, so I've always really enjoyed that about the audiobook. I have to say I wish there was more songs in the 3 films. I think they should have kept songs in the second 2. And lastly, one more book that I thoroughly enjoyed listening to on audiobook was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This book was originally published in the 1930s and is somewhat one of the original thrillers or suspense novels. It follows our protagonist who marries an older man, a widower, when she meets him on holiday, and she returns to his home, Manderley, to become the lady of the estate. But she's constantly haunted by the image of his previous wife, Rebecca, who everybody was obsessed with and talks about, and has left a massive imprint on the home she lived in before she died, which were of course under mysterious circumstances. So it's about our protagonist getting to grips with her husband's previous relationship and her place in this home, and Rebecca's spirit that just does not seem to want to go away. But those are a few of my audiobook recommendations that you can check out on BookBeat. One of the things I've been enjoying in particular about the app is that I can listen to short and long audiobooks. Sometimes I don't feel like spending my money on an audiobook that's only a couple of hours long, when I could spend that money on an audiobook that is 10 hours long, but I don't have to worry about that with this app, so that's been really nice as well. But do let me know what your favourite audiobooks are. What stories do you think are brought to life in a whole new and special way by listening to them and you would recommend? Please leave those in the comments down below. I'm always looking for more audiobooks, as I'm sure everybody else is. And when do you listen to audiobooks? When do you find the time to listen? Is it driving? Do you listen with a friend or a partner? Is it when you're walking or exercising? exercising like me, I'd love to know, maybe there is a new time of day where I could fit in an audiobook that I haven't already figured out. I do hope you've enjoyed this video though. Until next time guys, happy reading and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!